Hello, everybody. Welcome back to ELNET's Monday briefing. We had a hiatus last week, so it's good to, I guess, virtually see everybody and welcome you back today. If you've been paying attention to the news, there's certainly a lot to discuss. Israel launched 160 sorties into Syria last week to protect the Druze. There's word of an impending, and we shall see, deal with Hamas that will see the release of hostages. Gideon Saar, Israel's foreign minister, about a week and a half ago, did a tour of almost all of Europe, met with the EU, met with the Baltic states, and others. So a lot is going on in the region, and to help us get through much of it is Herb Keinon. We're welcoming Herb back after 6 months. The last time he was here was January 20th. So Herb is a diplomatic correspondent for the Jerusalem Post and author, known for his coverage of Israeli politics and foreign policy. He has written extensively on topics like immigration, religious parties, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He has also authored 2 books, French Fries and Pita and Lone Soldiers, Israel's Defenders from Around the World. Herb has lectured widely on Israeli affairs in various countries and frequently appears on radio and television, and we can say is now a frequent participant on ELNET briefing. So Herb, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I want to begin here where we began our conversation on January 20th, because at that time we had a new administration. There was also talks of an pending hostage deal, the release of 1,000 prisoners in Israeli prisons for 10 hostages. And I asked you how you were dealing with it. And you invoked Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. And it always reminds me of the Birds song, turn, 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 a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, and a time to laugh, a time to weep. Well, it seems like, as I said earlier, the more things change, the more they stay the same. A lot has happened in the span of 6 months, but yet here we are again, talking about the release of hostages. What's different to you and in the Israeli frame of mind right now between then and now? Exactly 6 months.
Look, it's interesting because like you said, so much has changed in that 6 months period. Most predominantly what happened in Iran. That's a huge game changer in the Middle East. But what struck me was, during the those 12 days, that 12-day war, it kind of felt here that we were living through history. And I've been in Israel for a long time, for 45 years, but I often asked myself what it was like to have lived here during the 6-day war. And then during the 12-day war, I kind of got a feeling of what that was like, that feeling of living through historical times. But what struck me was how quick that faded, right? How quick that faded and how quick the public conversation in Israel went back to the hostages and went back to Gaza. It was as if, nothing really matters until you get the hostages out of Gaza and you end that situation. And I think that's where we are I think that's where we are to a large extent right now. Still very much focused on Gaza, on the hostages. Over the last couple of days, I've noticed something else because, for much of the last 6 months in the Israeli media, right, because of the hostages and the protests, the hostage families and the protests, a lot of the onus for not moving on this deal in Israel, right, has been placed on Netanyahu and on the government. They didn't take the deal, or they were putting obstacles in the deal. What I've noticed over the last couple of days is in the media, in the mainstream Israeli media, which is highly critical of the prime minister to a large extent. That narrative has shifted a bit in the last week, and now the Israeli media themselves are saying it's not necessarily Bibi, right? It's Hamas. Hamas now is the obstacle, and I try to think what's changed, and I think what's changed is a lot of what's coming out of Washington, and the tone coming out of Washington has been for the last week and week and a half has been that the obstacle here is not Israel, it's not Netanyahu, it is Hamas, and that's a perceptible change over the last week.
Well, that's really interesting because it suggests that Israeli public opinion is so well informed by the United States, not by their own internal politics or messaging.
it, it means that the media is informed by the U.S. Again,
Mhm.
because I mean the public here is being led by the. But my impression is that the media's narrative has shifted, right? And I think that's because the media is taking its cues here from Washington. And if Witkoff is saying that it's Hamas, right, then I think that registers with the media much more than if somebody in the prime minister's office is saying it's Hamas.
Mhm.
There was also something interesting last week too. I don't know how much this registered with Israeli media, but Brett McCurk at the Aspen conference, he also said, and this is a Biden guy, right? He said that the
Mhm.
obstacle has been Hamas, and it's been Hamas for months. So I think that is starting to register a certain degree with the Israeli public. On the other hand, I mean, you have the hostage families who are getting an incredible amount of they get an incredible amount of press time, right? And their concern is getting their loved ones back home, and they're they're saying, well, Israel has to do more, Netanyahu has to do more, Netanyahu can do more. That's still out there, but you're starting to see a little bit more nuance here, saying, it's not all because Netanyahu wants his political survival, right? As that's one narrative
Mhm.
that's out there. Or it's not all because, the right wing wants an endless war because they want to take over Gaza. There's also, I think, there's more of an understanding that, there's two sides to this, and Hamas is a player, and right now Hamas is the one who's apparently holding this thing up. So it's not because it's weird, right? I mean, every couple you said the more things change, the more they stay the same. We've been hearing now for months, right? The president says, Trump says, things are looking good. We're going to have something in a couple of days. We're going to have something within the week, and it never happens.
Mhm.
And again, the onus has always been on Netanyahu. Now I think that's changed a bit.
So there are reports that Israel has eased some of its demands. At least that was what I read sometime last week. Can you shed some light on what the demands are, where Israel perhaps has capitulated on some of these demands, and where you think this is going?
Right. In the Israeli press, it's interesting. The Israeli press has been reporting that Israel has shown a lot of flexibility. And I think the flexibility they're showing is on the Morag corridor, right? There are a number of corridors in Gaza. One is the Rafah corridor, which is
Mhm.
southernmost point, the border with Egypt. Then just south of Khan Yunis, there's another corridor breaking off Khan Yunis from Rafah. Israel took over that corridor when it went back fighting a couple months ago. It said it wants to hold on to this corridor, but now in these negotiations, apparently saying that they're willing to show flexibility in withdrawing from that corridor as well. I think that's the main source of flexibility we've seen now over the last couple of days. I think it's also interesting to note that we saw something rather dramatic today, and that is for the first time since October the 3rd. I'm sorry, since October the 7th, Israel has gone into the refugee camps in the center of Gaza, in a place called Deir al-Balach. Deir al-Balach is a big refugee camp which Israel has not touched over the last 21 months. It went in today for the first time. One of the reasons it didn't go there up until now is the belief that that's probably where the hostages are. I think the
Mhm.
fact that Israel did go in today is a signal to Hamas that that there will be consequences if they don't show some flexibility and finish this thing and come to an agreement with Israel. So I think this is another pressure, another pressure point that Israel just added on a few hours ago.
Well, one of the concerns was if they were to go in there, that they risk the hostages' lives. So it's a pretty big calculation to play out here. If hostages are lost, who's going to bear the brunt of the blame?
Right. I mean, if hostages are lost, I mean, the government will bear a lot of the blame for that.
Yeah.
Look, it's interesting too. If you look how the IDF went into Deir al-Balach today, they didn't go in all guns blaring from all sides. They went in from one particular side of the refugee camp, apparently because there's certain knowledge or intelligence information about about where the hostages are being held. So they didn't want to go all forces out. They're doing it very carefully, but they are doing it, and that's a shift. We haven't seen that since the beginning.
So if you're a betting man, when do you would how likely is it that we're going to see the release of hostages and a deal prior to the Knesset going on recess, which I think is about a month away?
Yeah, the Knesset goes on recess next Sunday on the
Or next
27th.
Sunday?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look, I mean, I'm not. Again, you hear so often, well, it's just another couple of days away, another couple of days away, another couple of days away. We've been hearing this now for months. Until I see it, I'm not going to believe it. I don't know what it's going to. I personally don't know what it's going to take Hamas in order for them to give up the hostages, or if they're even willing to give up the hostages. I'm not sure what the pressure point is. What leverage we need. Uh, Qatar, is Qatar doing everything it can? I don't know. I mean, I would not venture a guess to say when it's going to happen, but I'm not overly confident it's going to happen before the Knesset goes on recess.
Okay. Um, you mentioned Iran earlier, and I want to revisit something you said also back 6 months ago. And I didn't pick up on it, I don't believe, when I heard it live, but I did watch our interview again so I could remember what it was we talked about. And it really struck me this time when I heard it. And you said October 7th wasn't the latest chapter of the Israeli Palestinian saga, it was the first chapter in the Israel Iran war. And many Israelis, if I won't use the word most. Many Israelis are starting to recognize how crucial it is uh, to take that into consideration, actually address Iran, as was the American administration. It's important that if we want things to change, we've got to deal with Iran. And so let's talk about Iran. Iran was dealt with. Um, I always assumed Iran was a rational actor. That when push came to shove, they would make decisions that seemed rational if you looked at it in the context of protecting the regime. I'm starting to question that. Um, you know, the regime was brought to the brink of collapse. The E3, which is Germany, France, and the UK, are reasonably threatening. I mean, it's not just talk, it doesn't seem, but reasonably threatening to invoke snapback sanctions. And we'll have to see about that, but they seem credible in their threat. But Iran, rather than negotiating, is just as hostile, just as belligerent. First, it started with the United States and calling out President Trump. Most recently, I think it was Laranjani who warned European um, political leaders to look up to make sure there wasn't a drone above their head. And just recently, Iranian lawmakers have threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. How are Israelis looking at this right now? If you had to rank real threats and concerns, where does Iran fall today? And how much faith do Israelis have in Europe and the US actually holding Iran accountable at this stage?
Look, as far as how Israelis see the threat, I think Israelis no longer view Iran right now as an existential threat. I think the feeling here in Jerusalem and also among the public is that threat for the time being. I don't know if it's 2 years, 3 years, a decade. That threat is no longer what it was. During that 12-day war. There was a lot of damage done. I know there's the debates. Did you destroy the program completely? Whether or not you destroyed it completely, you significantly downgraded it, right? They do not have what they had before June 13th, neither in terms of physical facilities nor in terms of the knowledge, right? I mean, there was one Iranian guy who once said, you can't knock out the knowledge. Well, we knocked out 13 of the top scientists, took out the archives, took out a lot of the knowledge they had. So it's not that they can't get it back, but it will take time before they do so. So I think to a certain degree, Israelis are resting kind of comfortably now, believing that it isn't an existential threat, and that in fact, strategically, Israel's probably at its best situation that it's been in a number of decades. Um, Also, you talk about Iranian threats. I think something else that Israelis have come to appreciate is, to a certain degree, Iran turned out to be a paper tiger. right? I mean, they've been threatening it for 30 years. They've been projecting their power through the threats, through their parades, their missile parades, and the rhetoric. And we were all petrified of doing anything. You didn't want to go after the head of the octopus because you're afraid what the head of the octopus would do. Well, you went after the head of the octopus, and it was tough, but you managed, right? So I think their threats have to be taken, with a grain of salt. If they dare to try to blockade the Straits of Tehran, I think there'll be a lot of action against Iran, which I don't think they want. Again, I think they've been humbled. Um, and I think that Israel and the West need to take now what they say with a grain of salt. To the second part of your question, how much stock do we put in America and in Europe? I think that as a result of what President Trump did, by bombing Fordo and by bombing the three nuclear installations, I think that gave us faith that the U.S., when push comes to shove, will take action. As far as Europe, I think there's a certain sense here that Europe understands now that Iran can be dealt with and needs to be dealt with. And I would take their threats for snapback sanctions much more seriously, because again, they also see what Iran is and is not capable of. And if in the past they were afraid of doing that snapback sanctions, I think that Iran's leverage against them, or their ability to threaten them with what they could do if the sanctions go into play, I think that's been lessened to a great deal as well. So it was a very significant thing that happened that has ramifications, I think, far down the line across many different boards, including in Europe.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like at this point, Israel can say, you know what, we did our part. It's on you, and we expect all of you to recognize the opportunities to step in and take leadership. So, the E3 has expressed quite vocally their intent to invoke snapback sanctions, and let's assume they will. Let's move to Syria now. Fighting broke out between the Syrian Druze and the Bedouin community, or the Bedouins that are there. Syrian government sent in government forces to purportedly protect or create peace, but that clearly didn't happen. 1,100 people were killed. 650 were Druze who were killed. Of that, I guess almost 50-50 between armed Druze and civilian Druze. I've not heard anybody discuss the Bedouins here. And they were a predicate for this to develop. We're talking about Sharaa, we're talking about Israel, we're talking about the Druze. Who are the Bedouins? I have this image in my head of what Bedouins are like, but it's not riding on motorcycles with automatic machine guns. So what's the history between the Bedouins in Syria and the Druze, and what sparked this?
Look, I'm not a big expert on the Syrian Bedouin community. Unfortunately, it's a Sunni community, and there's been long-standing friction between them and the Druze. It's for Sunni fundamentalists, the Druze are apostate sect of
Mm-hmm.
Islam, and there hasn't been a lot of love lost between the two factions for going back apparently for many years.
Okay.
When Assad was there, he kind of, he was able to hold it together. Through his the fear factor, he held it together. Now that he's not there, it's bursting out. Again, though, I'm not an expert on the Syrian Bedouin
Okay.
community. But what did precipitate it was on July 11th, apparently a Druze merchant, a Druze vegetable merchant, was kidnapped by the Bedouin. He was robbed and kidnapped. I think he was tortured. Then he was let go. The Druze then went, and in a retaliatory type of thing, they also kidnapped some Bedouins. The Bedouins then went back into the Druze towns, right? And then all hell broke out. And the Syrian, the government in Damascus sent in the armed forces to make Seder to calm things down. But apparently that's not exactly what happened, and they sided with the Bedouins and they went after the Druze. That's the timeline of what happened. Started on July 11th. the big fighting started on the 13th. I think Israel started bombing some Syrian tanks on the 15th, and then on the 16th bombed the headquarters in Damascus. Now, why did Israel get involved here? Right? I mean, that's
Hmm.
that's something that a lot of people asking, what dog do we have in this fight? And I think there's, excuse me, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Hmm.
I think there's a few things to keep in mind. First is this is in southern Syria, and Israel. Israel wants there to be now that before we know what happens with Syria, how Syria is going to turn out, right? Is he going to be pro-Western, or is he going to go back to his jihadist roots? Until that settles down and we get a firm answer on that, Israel has carved out these buffer zones inside Syria because it's not that far from there to the Golan Heights, and we want to, we're all traumatized by what happened on October 7th, and don't want to see these pickup trucks, these white Honda pickup trucks, do in the Golan what they did in Gaza. So they've carved out a buffer zone in Syria, which includes southern Syria, where the Jews are. So the warning was to this Israel, months ago. Netanyahu said to Sharaa, don't move your forces south of Damascus. When they started moving the forces south of Damascus, this was a red flag for Netanyahu. That's one element. The second element has to do with the obligations we feel to the Jewish community. Israel has the Jewish community of about 152,000 Jews in Israel, as opposed to about 600,000 in Syria, by the way.
Hmm.
150,000 Jews. These Jews, I mean, since 1956, the Jews have been going into the IDF. The Jews fight and die for Israel, and there's been this blood covenant that we've kind of created with the Jewish community. Um, and these Jews have, brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles in Syria. And when they see them being slaughtered in Sweden, they feel the same empathy for them that the Jews feel for other Jews around the world when they're going through problems, right? And so they demanded that the Israeli government take action, right? And they said, we fight and die for you. Now we want you to protect our kin. And so that was a pressure on the government to take action. And the government did take action, right? The government now is it enough action to satisfy what the Jews wanted? Maybe not, but I think it proved to the Jewish community here that they're important to us, that they're one of us, that we see them as brothers, and if the brothers of our brothers are in trouble, then we will take action. So I think that's the second element. I think there's also a third element here, which is important, which is kind of underreported, and that is it sends a message it sends a message to others who potential allies that we have their back. And I think that's an important message right now. And it's to a certain extent it's a corrective because if you remember back to what happened in Lebanon in 2000, in May of 2000, Ehud Barak pulled Israel out of Lebanon. We kind of abandoned the southern Lebanese army. 6,000 SLA members came into Israel and have kind of been absorbed here, but others stayed there, were imprisoned for some time by Hezbollah there. And that kind of dented our image regionally as somebody who you can count on as an ally, right? And I think what we did in Syria is kind of meant to correct that image because right now we're trying to get other allies. If you look at what's going on in Gaza right now, the day after Gaza, Israel still, hopes that the day after Gaza, we will be able to have some kind of cooperation with Gaza clans there. There's a Gaza clan
Hmm.
in southern Gaza who we're trying to deal with right now. This
Hmm.
sends a message to them as well that there are benefits of dealing with Israel, that Israel won't turn their back on you. I think that was an important message. I don't know, you saw these reports the other days about in Hebron. There's an Arab clan in
Yep.
Hebron wants to have an Emirate of
Emirates.
Hebron. Emirates of Hebron. Now, whether or not that's realistic or not, who knows, right? Probably not. But still, if somebody is going to stick out their neck for you, you want them to know that you will have their back. So I think that's also one of the messages that Israel sent by doing what it did in Syria. At the same time, I mean, we took risks, right? And by taking those, one of the risks was we're going against the U.S. here, right? I mean, the U.S. was unhappy with what Israel did because Trump is trying to prop up the new president of Syria. He hopes to have some non-aggression pact between Israel and Syria. But I think having the backs of the Israeli Jews here was so important for the government that they were willing to take this action, even though they realized there probably wasn't going to make a lot of folks in Washington happy.
There's a lot to unpack there. A lot of questions I want to ask on the heels of what you just said. So let's start with the second one, which was, did they take enough action to appease the Druze? You could also say, did they take too much action? What is the reason that they bombed the part of the presidential palace? Did they have to go into Damascus to bomb the defense ministry? Um, what was the calculation there? Certainly, we understand why they want to go in and protect the Druze communities. Did they overstep the Israelis in this case?
They might have. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see if they overstep. I think the it was meant to send a message, and I think it sent a message. I mean, look, I mean, Israel didn't bomb there without first giving their warning that they were going to do it, right? I mean, they gave a heads up, and then they did it, and it was a warning to the president. Take this seriously. Take our interest here very seriously. Uh, I mean, there's an argument in Israel that like you said, that if you want to protect the Jews, you don't necessarily have to bomb in Damascus. And maybe they overstepped, they went too far. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how it turns out. But I think I think the intent was not necessarily to kill a lot of people in Damascus, which it
Mhm.
didn't do, but just to send a message. Take this seriously. This is very important to us.
All right, and the third one, and before I ask that other follow-up question I was going to ask, I want to remind everybody, feel free to send in a question. We will devote time to asking your questions in just a bit. You can send it to the chat that Randy just put there. So the second one, again, you sort of mentioned Trump, to reminding, you're proving to your allies that Israel will always be there. But yet Israel's biggest ally, the United States, was pretty upset. I mean, Trump, if you believe some of the reports, wasn't necessarily Trump, but it was other officials calling him a madman. He seems to want to bomb everything. Those are pretty significant leaked statements. Um, I get the sense with President Trump and the administration, because I think we've seen this before, that the end game is usually the deal. And that's what President Trump wants, a deal. And H.R. McMaster terms it as strategic empathy, which is understanding the other side is more than just understanding what you want to accomplish. And we've sort of seen it with Zelensky and Putin. Push, push, push on Zelensky. Finally, Putin continues doing what he's doing. And then Trump recognizes, oh, maybe it's Putin that I have to deal with, not Zelensky. Iran kind of push a little bit on Israel. Oh, I realize it's actually Iran that's the problem, and I will now support Israel. Here, it's the reaction. He just screwed up potentially what President Trump wants to achieve with Sharaa without recognizing the impending doom, the catastrophic doom to the Druze, and having an understanding of the history there, that at some point he's going to back up and say, wait a second, perhaps I realize now what Israel was doing, and we've got to be a little gentler with how we're handling our relationships there. Any thoughts on that?
Look, my first thought is, I mean, you quoted this story from Axios about, I think it was, some source in the White House or
Yeah.
some source close to Trump said that, Bibi's a madman. Um, or he's gone mad, that he's gone trigger happy and he thinks he can bomb wherever he wants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would take those types of stories about unnamed sources saying something. I would take that a little bit with a grain of salt, and I'll tell you why. A week before Israel bombed Iran, if you remember, there was a conversation between Trump and Netanyahu, and in the press, that conversation was described as extremely difficult. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The Trump read him the riot act. Right? And it turns out that was not what happened, not what transpired. Again, we in the press, we like to look for these points of conflict, especially when it comes to conflict between Israel and the U.S. It's something that generates headlines. I'm not saying that this guy in the White House didn't say what Axios said he said, but whether or not that represents the thinking of Trump or all those around Trump, I would just take that with a grain of salt. What I'm trying to say is let's not turn into a crisis Israel-U.S. relations or Trump and Netanyahu relations based on an unsourced article on Axios, because we've seen that those stories in the past have turned out wrong. Now, I'm not saying that what Israel did in Syria necessarily served American interests. Trump, he wants to prop up Syria, but he also wants to see a Syria that is controlled, and in a Syria that that the president has control of. And what we saw in the south of Syria over the last week is that there's areas that he can't control, and that he can't even control to a certain extent his own military forces who go into Suwaida, into the Druze areas, and start cutting off the mustaches of Druze to humiliate them. Right. So that's also not the Syria that he wants to see. We have to build things on a real base, right? We have to build things on reality. This is one of the problems we've had in the Middle East in the past, is that we've tried to build these giant castles on these illusions, right? Let's not have any illusions of Syria, of the degree of control that the Syrian president has. And I think Trump, understands that, or people around Trump understand it. I think Marco Rubio understands it. I think the envoy, the ambassador to Turkey, who's now the ambassador to Syria, what's his name,
Barak,
Baker, uh,
Barak, I believe.
Barak. I
Yeah.
mean, he made some, statements, telling the Syrian president he better get his act together. So again, this wasn't necessarily, I think, what the Americans dreamed we would do, but I think there's a degree of understanding why we did it, and I would not overstate, unsourced quotes in one media story.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, and thanks for that. It's helpful to kind of look at it through that framework. Let's talk about Sharaa. I don't think there's consensus by anybody on who Sharaa is and what he is responsible for or not. I mean, he kind of rules a ragtag crew. As you said, he can't control many of his own forces. Did he play a role in this? Did he not play a role in this? Is he a fundamentalist who won't shed his stripes? Or is he reformed? Gideon Saar, before he was supposed to meet with, I think, Sharaa on the sidelines of an EU meeting, and said he was looking forward to meeting him. Not too long thereafter, Amichai Chikli puts out that we should take the guy out. What's your sense of Ahmed al Sharaa or Ahmed Sharaa? Where do you think the guy is going to go here, if you have any sense? And what's some of the thinking in Israel?
Look, we don't know. I mean, the bottom line is we don't know. I mean, he's saying all the right things, but then we see certain actions like we saw last week, which make you wonder, where the guy's head is really at. And the bottom line is nobody yet knows. We have to wait until the dust settles. So that places Israel into a situation where it has to prepare for both scenarios, right? It has to prepare for the scenario where Sharaa goes back to his jihadist roots, his Al Qaeda roots. That's the real Sharaa, and he's going to act on that. It has to prepare for that, which it did right after after Assad's downfall, when it destroyed the Syrian army, and when it went in and it carved out this buffer zone. Again, preparing for perhaps the eventuality that Sharaa will turn out to be a jihadist. On the other hand, it also has to prepare for the possibility, well, hey, maybe something has changed. Maybe this is a new chapter in the Middle East, a new chapter in our relations with Syria. They have to be willing to accept that maybe this will be a possibility as well. And I think we were going in that direction, right? I mean, there were reports that Sharaa met with the head of the Israeli National Security Council. I think Sharaa
Mhm.
said himself that he speaks directly to the Israelis. So I think Israel was moving in that direction. But then we got hit with what we got hit by last week, and that turned everything upside down. So it's going to take time. It's going to take time before you can figure out who this guy really is. And in that interim, Israel has to prepare for both eventualities. Uh, Eventuality that they're going to have to take action against him, or the eventuality that it's for real and that you can actually do business with him. But it's unfortunately too soon to tell.
I think the reality in the Middle East, particularly in the fundamentalist oriented countries, the only way you're going to have regime change is probably by a strong man who's willing to, knock enough heads to make it untenable for the other side to want to continue the war. So it's one violent man against another, is what it seems. And that leads me to Gaza. And you mentioned the clans that Israel is dealing with. Now, the person heading it or leading it, and they're called the Popular Forces, I believe, Yasser Abu Shabab. So it's the Shabab clan that is taking up arms against Hamas. And I want to read you something that I read. He said, "We are a non-political popular movement that seeks to build a Palestinian society that is stable, free from violence, peaceful, secure, living with dignity, and believing in dialogue as a legitimate means to achieve future understanding." What do you know about this guy? And words too good to be true, or is he a strong man who has opportunity?
Look, I think there's a lot of parallels between him and Sharaa in Syria. I mean, he doesn't have he's not coming from the Girl Scouts, right? I mean, he was very much involved with the smuggling from Sinai. He's head of a criminal gang in Gaza. He's not necessarily some guy that if you had your druthers, he would be the guy that you want to deal with. But he has stepped forward, right? And he's saying the right thing. So I think to a certain degree, Israel's trying to find other alternatives to two things in Gaza. Number one is to Hamas, and the other is to the Palestinian Authority. Now, a lot of people in the West, they say, well, what's the matter with the Palestinian Authority? Why not just put them in Gaza? Why not put them in Gaza? Because we've been dealing with them for 30 years, and it hasn't turned out well. For 30 years, they've been educating their children to hate Jews and to kill Israelis. Right, so that's not necessarily the people now you want to put in charge of Gaza. So you have to look for other options. The other options aren't great. Here's a guy who's emerged. Can you deal with him? See how it goes. I mean, I would put all my eggs in his basket, but I wouldn't necessarily, say that I can't deal with him because he had a checkered past. Again, there's a lot of similarities with how you
Mhm.
have to deal with him, like how you have to deal with Sharaa in Syria.
Yeah, it seems like a new man is evolving in the Middle East, and we'll have to see where these new men take it. There is an element of optimism that you have to have with these guys, but certainly a reserved optimism. But it's interesting that they both have sort of evolved at the same time, saying very similar things, but as you said, coming with very checkered paths.
Look, I mean, they all have their interests. Right? Bashar obviously
Yeah.
has an interest in wanting to get into the good graces of the West, which he's done pretty effectively.
Mhm.
The Shabab hasn't been as successful. Look, it's interesting too because as bad a guy as Assad and his father were, and they were bad guys, right? They were horrible dictators. For Israel, Israel likes predictability. Right? I mean, it likes predictability. And with Assad, we had a degree of predictability. We knew who we were dealing with. We knew how he would react. And now with the new president in Syria, it's a period of unpredictability. We don't know how he's going to act, and that creates problems for us strategically in how you plan. And that's why, like I said, Israel's got to plan for both eventualities.
So I'm going to ask one question. Doesn't mean it's a short answer, but one question on politics, because I think it's really interesting to hear what's going on inside Israel right now. Then we'll open it up for questions. So let's talk Israeli politics. The Haredi um, parties have walked away. Some have walked away from the government and the coalition. Shas has remained in the coalition but walked away from the government, which allows Netanyahu to retain 61 seats. So he still has the coalition. All of this over the draft of Haredis. You wrote an article last week talking about the different calculations that Netanyahu has to make and what Shas has to make going into a potential election sometime either somewhere between October and probably January, I guess. What are the what are the different calculations that both sides have to make?
Okay. First of all, let me just start by saying that elections in Israel have to be held by October 2026, right? That's a couple of weeks before the midterm elections in the states, right? Already in the states, people are gearing up for the midterm elections, correct? Right, so
Mhm.
here too, people are already gearing up for the elections that have to be held by October 26th. That's the last date by when they have to be held. The question now is whether all this political maneuvering means that we're going to go to elections sooner, right? Will there be early elections? Um, the Knesset goes on its recess. It's got a 3 month summer recess starting next Sunday, which means that until it comes back into session on, I think, October 17th after Sukkot, right? You can't have a vote in the Knesset to bring down the government. So Bibi has now 3 months in which he can decide what he wants to do with this whole Haredi conscription issue. And the Haredi conscription issue right now is a huge hot button issue in Israel, right? It's a hot button issue to the degree that it never has been in the past. And in the past, there's always been a sense that there's a degree of inequality that the Haredim don't have to, the ultra Orthodox don't have to go in the army, but everybody else does. But now it's not even an issue of inequality. It's just an issue that the army needs bodies. There's just not enough bodies. I've got a son who's going into Miluim again next week, right, for his fourth time, right, doing upward of 350 days. I've got two other sons and a son-in-law who are going to be doing the same thing around Rosh Hashanah. And it's too much, right? Too few people are carrying the burden. And I think that is a sense that most of the Jewish non-Haredi population of this country feels. You've seen a big shift among the religious Zionists, right? The religious
Mhm.
Zionists who in the past had a certain degree of sympathy for their argument, well, they're studying Torah, so they don't need to fight. Right now, among most religious Zionists, or a large percentage of the religious Zionist population, who are carrying a big part of this burden and who disproportionately are falling, soldiers are falling in the war, they're fed up with this whole thing. And they say, it has to change. So it's a huge societal issue. So Bibi's calculation now needs to be, right, in these next 3 months, does he want to come to an agreement with the Haredim, with the ultra-Orthodox, knowing that in the not so distant future, he's going to go to elections? And does he want to go to the elections when the campaign against him will be, you passed into law something that will enshrine Haredi draft dodgers, right? Is that how you want to go to the elections? And I personally don't think it's a wise political decision for him to do that, right? I think he'll get clobbered. I think there's a certain, base Likud voters he'll get no matter what, right? But I think he could lose 3, 4 seats of people who just will not vote for Likud if they pass this law, but will go rather look for another right-wing party who's putting on their banner this whole thing about you have to have universal Jewish conscription, right? And you have parties who are doing that. Avigdor Lieberman's party, it's a right-wing
Mhm.
party. This has been his issue for years. He could pick up a lot. Naftali Bennett is going to run, right? He's starting a party again, and he's also been very vocal about this issue. So I'm not sure it's politically wise for Netanyahu during this recess to try to figure a way that he can keep the Haredim in. Because I think when he does go to the polls, if he does go on that ticket, he will lose. Now, Netanyahu is anything but an unwise politician. I mean, if I
He's not an
understand this,
amateur at this game.
right, if I understand this, he understands this many times more, right? So it'll be interesting in this recess period to see where he goes with this. If he tries to come to some kind of deal with the Haredim, then he just wants the government to last for a few more months. If he doesn't want to cut a deal during this time, it's a sign that elections are going to happen. If he goes back, if the Knesset, once the Knesset comes back into session on October 17th, let's say it votes to dissolve itself immediately, the earliest that elections can be held would be the end of January, right? So again, we're talking about next elections in Israel will be held from, sometime in the end of January to sometime in October. And that's not that long. That's not that long away. All the politicians are now looking at what will they want to go to the polls on, what issues they want to go
Mhm.
on. This is one issue. Look, a lot of people are saying, another reason why we might be coming to the end of the war in Gaza is because, Netanyahu wants to go to the polls having ended the war in Gaza as well. So there's all kinds of different, calculations being done right now about how the upcoming elections, and they're coming up, whether it's in October or in January, they're coming up, how that's going to affect all these kind of dramatic decisions.
So I was listening to Amit Segal um, talk, and he had an interesting perspective that I would like to get your thoughts since we're talking about Netanyahu. He said the real quandary for Israelis is they've got to determine whether they want to bring down the king or they want to bring down the kingmaker or the kingmakers. You can't have both, meaning if you want to make sure that the Haredi parties are not in the coalition, you must form a coalition. And the only person likely to form the coalition would still be Netanyahu, who's going to bring Likud. If you want to bring down the king, in this case Netanyahu, the opposition or the opposition would have to align with the Haredis to get to the 61. And if you don't have that, then Netanyahu could prolong this because all he needs is 50 to maintain power, in essence. What are your thoughts on that and the struggles of Israeli understanding kingmaker from king?
Look, I think that from now until the elections, a lot of things could change on the political map. I think what Amit Segal is talking about when he's looking at the polling today shows that you have about a 60-50 split, right? Pretty much what we had when we went to that wonderful period when we have 5 elections in 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't changed that much. But I ask myself though, there might be another player who might emerge, right? Another party that might emerge that could shift things around a bit. And again, you don't have to shift things around majorly. You just have to shift them around a bit. What do I mean? I mean, like right now, you have two blocks. You have the anti-BB block and you have the pro-BB block. So what you're seeing right now is like you're seeing all these moves. Gadi Eisenkot split off from Benny Gantz. He's going to start his own party, go with another party. What does that do? That essentially just rearranges the furniture on one block. It doesn't move votes from one block to the other. I think that the Haredi issue could actually move votes from one block to the other because if you have a center right party who says that this thing with the Haredim is just it's nuts and it's unsustainable, it can't go on. I think they can actually take from the Likud, from the right wing bloc, and move them to another party that could move then and join a coalition with Benny Gantz, with Lapid, and with Naftali Bennett. So I think that there could emerge another political formation that actually could move the votes from the right to the center left. And the issue that will do that will be precisely the Haredi
Mm-hmm.
issue.
It seems like the Haredis have positioned themselves to be out of a job for a long time because if there's a coalition without them, I can't imagine they're going to be welcomed back anytime soon. But for an extended period of time, they'll be out of the coalition, but we'll have to see where this goes. Um, I'm going to give a brief commercial for ELNET, and then we're going to open it up to some questions. Look, I'm going to start by mixing my metaphors. I do this all the time. We are certainly in the dog days of summer, but there is no rest for the weary. ELNET just kicked off the ELNET Security and Defense Initiative with Germany's aerospace and defense industries, chaired by Thomas Rokamp, who is the Defense Committee, the Bundestag's Defense Committee chairman. And we're working with the Italian government to implement a joint cybersecurity initiative, not to mention the continuation of our delegations to and from Israel for European members of parliament and political influencers. We have not stopped, though it may seem a bit slow for all of us in the summer. There is so much more to do in the second half of this year. We've got a lot planned, but unlike some organizations that have far more money than they know what to do with, we have far more initiatives than we have resources to fund. And that's where all of you come in. So as we head into the back end of this year, please keep ELNET in mind as you determine that you're going to have more charitable investments available towards the end of this year. You don't have to wait to the end of this year, but it's generally around October that we all start wondering where should our investment go. And it should go to ELNET because we've got a lot of things useful, productive to do with it. So with that, thank you for all you do for ELNET, and we appreciate everything you will do in the balance of the year. So let's go to our chair emeritus, Larry Hochberg, who has this question for you. Why is the E3 slow at applying snapback sanctions? They seem to want to engage in more and more negotiations. They're doing that as we speak or upcoming. Why don't they just go ahead and initiate it first?
Look, I mean, I was actually surprised that they put a deadline on it. To my understanding, they put a deadline on the talks at the end of August. As far as Europe goes, that's warp speed. For them to put that kind of deadline on something. Had Israel not taken the action it did in Iran, I don't think any of that would have happened, right? I think it's all a result of what we did, and I think it just changed the equation to a great deal, where you're actually seeing them now take more action than I think they would have been willing to do in the past. So I'm pleased that that they put a deadline. I think that's a good thing, and the deadline is not that far away. End of August isn't that far away.
Okay, we've got one from Mindy Stein, who wants to know, to what extent would Israel take action outside of Gaza to deal with Hamas leaders who are either in Qatar or in Turkey?
I think it'd be difficult, right? Because Israel is being very careful not to take action in Qatar or in Turkey. They remember what happened. They took out a guy in the UAE back in 2010, and that caused a huge diplomatic crisis. At the time, Israel was getting closer to the UAE, caused a huge crisis. They don't want to go that route with Turkey or with Qatar because they both, play a significant role on the international community, and it would be too risky. It would be too risky diplomatically for Israel to do that, I think.
Okay. And another question here is about Gideon Saar's travel throughout Europe. What do you think he went in? What was his mandate when he was talking to the leaders of the Baltics, Romania, where I believe there's a nice deal planned, 3 to 5 billion, which would be the largest Romanian defense deal ever done, is with Israel. And then he went over and met with Kaja Kallas. What did he go in to get, and what do you think he got?
Look, I think it was clear that, I mean, the EU, that they were having a meeting of the foreign ministers, and there was on the table was sanctions against Israel that Ireland, Spain, and Slovenia put forward. There was talk about canceling the EU association agreement with Israel. So I think his trip to the EU was definitely about that, to fend that off, to make sure that doesn't happen. And to that degree, he was successful, right? I mean, it did not go through. There were no sanctions put on Israel when the foreign ministers met. Also, right before the meeting, Israel agreed with the Europeans that they would allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza, which they did. I think there's 150 trucks or something a day, which was more double than was going at the time. That was also the purpose of that, was to kind of get the EU not to clamp any kind of sanctions or take any kind of punitive actions against Israel. So that was definitely the purpose of his visit to Europe. I think the Czech Republic, Hungary, Italy, Austria, Germany, Greece, Latvia, Estonia, these countries stepped up, and I think they stepped up. They're not necessarily on their own, but they stepped up because there was a diplomatic push by Israel to prevent again, Ireland, Spain, and Slovenia from moving these measures forward, and I think it was successful.
Well, somewhat selfishly, I want to give ELNET a large amount of credit for the amount of work we do building relationships in the Baltics and the surrounding Central and Eastern European countries, including our executive director there, Martha Kubica. It's just remarkable how friendly and aligned they have been. And I also want to give credit to Kaja Kallas. I don't know this, but I got the sense that she really didn't want to sanction Israel. That, I got the sense, don't know why, she really just wanted some goodwill from Gideon Saar to say, look, we're doing everything we can. And it sort of, it made her job easier to say, we're not going to go forward with this. So credit to those who deserve that credit. That is all the questions we have. I am going to ask Tom Flesch, ELNET chairman, to say a few words. Before Tom, I just want to let everybody know next week we are supposed to have Jackie Alexander, who's the CEO of Honest Reporting, to talk about media bias, Israel's PR, and what we're seeing on Israel's eighth front. That is the battle against the media. So Tom, the floor is yours. Thank you, Herb.
Unmute. First of all, I want to thank, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, great. Herb, as always, very informative. Thank you so much for being with us today and presenting.
Thank you.
Thanks for moderating. My message is very short. Last week, we had our annual meeting, our ELNET, ELNET US annual meeting. And during that meeting, the conversations came up about our Monday morning briefings and how important our listeners and our audience, and how faithful they are to watching it every Monday. As a matter of fact, they miss it on those occasions when it's canceled or not scheduled. My point today is that you heard from Mark, you've heard from others about the costs of producing this and other delegations and the things that we were engaged in, and they're escalating. And no gift is too small. Every gift is appreciated. Our audience is really, really important. The numbers are keeping pretty consistent on the viewers. So we know that we're presenting something that is that is favored by our viewers. And so perhaps even if it's a small gift, consider making it twice a year, maybe once in the mid-year and once in the end of the year. Somehow or another, we just really, really need your financial resources to help us continue doing what we're doing. And the demands of what we're doing just keep on escalating. And that's purely because of one reason. And that is what we're doing is successful. And we're seeing great results. And we're seeing great results in Europe. We're seeing great results in Israel. We're seeing actually great results in the Middle East from our efforts. So please, I'm encouraging you to make gifts to ELNET as a priority, to FELNET, is the American arm. And we will make sure, if you want to direct it to any specific affiliate in Europe, we'll make sure that that gift will find its way there. So if we can post, Randy, if you please just post the giving instructions again so everybody can see it, and appreciate it very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Again, thanks a lot, Herb. Really appreciate you joining us. Perhaps it won't be another 6 months before we have you back, but I know a lot will happen between now and whenever we speak in the future. So stay well, stay safe, and thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night. Lila Tov.